Good morning. It's Tuesday, February 28th, 2023. We are in the second half of the morning session for Senate Natural Resources and Energy. We're returning our work to S100 and activating housing opportunities made for everyone. And we are doing a bill walkthrough. So back to council, please, to resume that tour.
Melissa Kowski, Office of Legislative Counsel. Yes, S100, also known as the Home Bill. Housing opportunities made for everyone. I know you like an acronym. There we have it.
I wondered why it was.
I can't take any credit for it. Senator Ron Hinsdale came up with it. So
It works better as an acronym than. Okay, let's go.
So we last left off on page 9 of the bill as introduced, section 5. Section 5 amends 24 VSA 4441, preparation of bylaws and regulatory tools. So there's this existing language in 4441 that requires when considering an amendment to a bylaw, the Planning Commission prepares a report that is given to the Department of Housing and Community Development. And the report is supposed to give an explanation of what is in the proposed bylaw amendment or repeal, as well as statement of purpose. And then, so this is an existing report that already exists. So there's a couple of small changes that are being added to it. So first on page 9, line 16, the report shall include findings regarding how the proposal conforms with or furthers the goals and policies contained in the municipal plan, including the effect of the proposal on the availability of safe and affordable housing, and sections 4412, 4413, and 4414 of this title. 4412 is section 2 of this bill. 4413 is section 3 of this bill, and section 4414 is section 1. So it's directly referencing, in addition to all the other provisions in that bill, in those existing statutes. This report needs to reflect on how 4412, 13, and 14 are included in the or addressed in the bylaw, and that includes the new provisions, parking, duplexing, density, etc., homeless shelters, etc. And then on page 10, still in this section, the language the sentence that was struck on the prior page directed DHCD to come up with a form for this report, and that is given additional language here on page 10. So upon adoption or amendment of a bylaw, the Planning Commission shall prepare an adoption report informing content provided by the Department of Housing and Community Development that demonstrates conformity with 4412, 13, and 14, and provides information on the municipal application of subchapters 7, which are bylaws, 9, administration, and 10 panels of this chapter for the municipal planning data center and the prospective development of statewide zoning atlas. So this is attempting to get the towns to submit more data in this report that they're already supposed to be submitting to DHCD, and it does mention the prospective development of a statewide zoning atlas. So I will say that the prior version of this bill had additional things on this list, so it's now kind of a short list. But this is what the committee did agree to. And so this is largely what the towns already have to do.
Can you fill us in a little bit on what no longer is reported on?
Based on what the changes. So none of the things in the existing report have been lost.
Okay.
This language in sub H originally included additional provisions that would have added additional things the municipalities were supposed to submit as part of this report. Is that what you're asking me to clarify?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what, if it's changed, if it's just additional information, that seems like all to the good. if there are considerations that used to be reported on
No,
that are no longer there, that could become problematic.
no, none of the existing provisions that are existing are being lost.
Okay, great.
There was just additional information sought that is not moving forward.
Any questions? All right. Let's keep going.
All right, section 6 relates to amends 24 VSA 4465, which outlines the appeals of decisions for the administrative officer. So when you're working, we're talking here in all these sections about municipal zoning. Municipal zoning is administered by an administrative officer and or the appropriate municipal panel of the town. That appropriate municipal panel can take multiple forms, including the Board of Adjustment or the Development Review Board. Towns structured differently. But what you should just know about this section is that it establishes who may appeal a decision. So we're specifically talking about who fits under the definition of interested person. And so on page 11, the list of statutory interested person are listed, and number 4 is being struck. And so the list includes the person owning title to the property, or municipality, or solid waste management district, the municipality that has a plan or a bylaw at issue under this chapter, or the adjoining municipality, a person owning property in the immediate neighborhood of the property that is subject to any decision. And then number 4, which is being struck, is any 10 persons who may be in any combination of real voters or property owners within a municipality. And there's additional language clarifying what that is meant. This is striking as an interested person any 10 persons. So it is removing that ability to appeal. Number 5 is that any state agency is related to this.
And the narrow eligibility to be appellant. Is this like other, does this make this section of law more like the ability to appeal anywhere else? Or is this unique?
This is fairly, well, the existence of this provision is fairly unique.
Okay.
So the municipal zoning appeals process is unique into itself, honestly. So.
Senator Watson,
Oh.
You're as a municipal official for years, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm glad to see it struck. It seems to me that it's the kind of thing that, like, if there are 10 people in a town that just don't like, Cindy Lou Who, putting up a barn, taking down a barn, then, it seems to me that they have to be, they have to have a particularized interest, and I'm not sure that just any 10 people would. But anyway, so anyway, let's see.
Yeah, so
We're gonna argue about this somewhere along the lines, we understand what we're doing.
sure, I'm flagging it, it's something to reconsider. I'm just also pausing. So, Senator McDonough, what would you want, even if we don't sort it all out now?
Years ago, when Act 250 passed, the notion was things were happening without planning. And there ought to be plans ahead of time, so that what is being done is measured against something. So we Act passed, and it was supposed, originally it was gonna zone. It didn't zone, it said things would be taken up in local communities, based on what local community values were. So that was complicated, and the state sent communities money year after year if they chose to zone. And they zoned, which was establishing lawful, the can'ts of whatever. And they did that through governmental process and through the legislative process. Sometimes they did it by majority vote. And that was those are the laws you followed. They were called zoning rules. And you followed them unless there was a reason that you were exempted from them or easement. They were, 98% what was intended, but something stood in the way. And now that the towns have done that, we're saying, well, we don't care what you did. We're going to override it, and we're going to zone on your behalf. Now, that may be the only way out of the dilemma we're in. But the problem isn't that 10 people appealed the law when the law wasn't being followed. The law wasn't being followed, and someone stood up and said, hey, you're not following the law. And we're not dealing with that, and that's not the problem we have. We are saying, well, the law you have in your town, we're preempting, going to override you, and we're going to establish the law in your town. You aren't going to do that. That's what we're doing here. And
Even more broadly, not only
Yeah.
10%.
that's what we're doing here. We had the project across the street with the hotel that didn't come to fruition. There are hotel projects throughout the state that didn't come to fruition. And it wasn't because of appeals, and it wasn't because of zoning. It was because during that time, building hotels was not a wise idea, and the banks didn't want to fund the building of hotels. And we have said and come up with reasons that hotels didn't get built because we didn't want to admit that they just weren't going to build them. You couldn't get funding. So we're changing, imposing our statewide zoning law that when it comes to housing, whatever you have done in the last X number of years to be exclusive, discriminatory, selfish, or whatever, and we're overriding that, we're putting in, this is what's going to happen now. And it's not because people in communities who followed the law and played by the rules appealed something. It's because we have decided that we know more than towns and that the state needs this housing. And why don't we just say that to ourselves instead of coming up with these blaming people for following the rules that they play by that were established in a proper way, and say, well, we're changing the rules of the game. You're gonna have to throw the pitch within 12 seconds from now on, and that's the new rule. But yeah, so that's my 2 cents. That's my 2 cents here. Why don't we say that we're doing what we're doing for the reasons we're doing it, which are, I think most people think are compelling, is a tough word, are called for. Bloomberg says repeatedly that the 2 things that affect housing zoning and interest rates. And we're tackling the zoning issue, overriding communities' zoning, not their appeal process.
So thank you. So there is that big question of like, is the state going to dictate zoning? Senator Watson?
Mostly, I would like to continue on, but I also don't feel like in I just want to make sure that I'm clear, because I don't want something to stand on the record if it's not accurate. Having to have been I would call myself a subject matter expert on the garage situation across the street. I would say that the delay caused by the appeal is why it didn't move forward, not because it was not a good investment. Now, so I just wanted to make sure to correct that.
Yeah.
I would love to keep moving, and I'm sure we will talk about all of these things at length at some point.
Yes. Agreed. And that brings us to page 12, section 7.
Section 7 and 8 are related. They have to do with municipal review of subdivision plats. So section 7 amends the subdivision review section. Changes on page 12, line 11 start approval of plats. Before a plat for a subdivision is approved, a public hearing on the plat may be held by the appropriate municipal panel after public notice. A bylaw may provide for when a public hearing is required. Additionally, farther down on line 17, the approval of the appropriate municipal panel or administrative officer, if the bylaw provide for their approval, shall expire. So there are two things happening, and I can read through the further language if you'd like, but there are two things happening in regards to subdivision approval. First, currently under the statute, any subdivision needs to have a public hearing. This is making that permissive and allowing the municipality to set standards for when they require a public hearing. Additionally, it clarifies the language that is already inherent, but some towns already allow their administrative officer to approve subdivisions. This is making it further clear that the bylaws may provide for the administrative officer to approve plats.
So these sound like changes designed in part to allow things to keep moving. I don't know if there are stories about things being held up or that hearings on subdivisions are currently required, and that someone's asserting it's an administrative burden or just adding time to the development line. I know it's not your job characterizing the arguments that were presented.
Not really. I guess I could only just say that the prior version of this bill, it was originally proposed to allow towns to distinguish between major and minor permits for subdivisions. But the committee that seemed a little unnecessarily complicated, and so it just is giving the removing the requirement that there has to be a hearing on every subdivision, but allowing the town to decide when a hearing is necessary.
Right. So one more edit in this section 13.
Oh, and it's the same language again on page 13. So if the administrator is allowed to approve, so it's just adding throughout. And then subdivision, section 8, which goes on to page 14, does the same thing, in that it provides that the bylaws may include provisions to allow the administrative officer to approve subdivisions.
Okay, thank you. And any questions? 8.
It's section 8. The language changes on page 14.
It's just lower the case difference.
Oh, yes. Sorry, yes. Changing the capitalization. Yeah.
I was like,
Most of these sections in Title 24 haven't been updated in a long, almost 18 years. So there's some punctuation that we're fixing along the way.
Okay, Senator Watson?
Sorry, I apologize about going back, but I'm just remembering that as a result of the case with the garage across the street, the Supreme Court issued some kind of statement about the 10, the clause about the 10 people, to clarify it, and I don't know if that is something that, like, should I try to find that statement? Is that an easy thing for you to find, Ellen? Is it clarification from the Supreme Court? What would be the best? Because I think that might have relevance.
Understand this better.
Yeah,
Mr.
I can see if I can try to find it. If I can't, I will.
Kelsey, does this sound familiar?
No.
Okay,
So Senator Watson, since you are our content expert on that particular project.
I will see if I can
Do a
find
little
it.
sleuthing, that would be great,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess
Sorry.
we can talk about it after. I guess I would just wonder why you are interested.
Oh.
But
Well, I think that
we can, yeah.
chat further, but, yeah.
Okay, so that takes us to section 9, page 14.
So section 9 is clarifying language related again to appeals. It is largely existing language that has been rephrased. And so I can say that last year, a concern was raised that this existing subdivision E of 4471 is extremely vague. And so to the point of not being understandable. And so it has been redrafted using nearly all the same words in order to make it clear. And so I will discuss the implications of that afterwards. So this is about appeals of zoning decisions. So on the bottom of page 14, notwithstanding subsection A, a determination by an appropriate municipal panel that a residential development will not cause an undue adverse effect on the character of the area affected shall not be subject to appeal if the proposed residential development seeking conditional use approval under 4414(3) is within a designated downtown, growth center, or neighborhood development area. Other elements of the determination made by the appropriate municipal panel may be appealed. So the question had come up. So the first sentence, the question was, okay, if the town determines that a residential development fits the character of the area, this provision of law says that that decision cannot be appealed. And so the question was, what does that mean? And so the second sentence was added to say, and so this is moving on beyond more than just a clarification. It's specifying that other elements of the determination may be appealed, but the character of the area cannot be appealed.
It's already been settled.
Yes, if the town has found that it meets the character of the area, an opponent cannot appeal that decision.
A determination by an appropriate municipal panel that it won't have an undue adverse effect. Okay, so if the town approves it, then you can't appeal using that criteria, that it will have an undue adverse impact on the character of the area.
Yes.
But every other all the other criteria can't be appealed.
Yes, and so I think there is, this is a policy decision, obviously, but 4471E is an existing provision in law. And so it's a very narrow application. It's talking about residential development located in a downtown, a growth center, or a neighborhood development area. And so it's asking that if the town finds it's within the character of the area, an opponent cannot appeal that decision.
Yes, Senator Warren.
Is the logic that this applies to a designated downtown area?
Yeah.
That designation process has already defined what is the character.
To an extent, yes, and that municipality is then reviewing the project.
To what extent is that not the case? You said to an extent, so it's not, as opposed to, you can't do projects. Simple, yes.
Well,
So
I'm
where-
a lawyer, so I can't, I mean, we're talking about housing. And we're talking about downtowns, growth centers, and neighborhood development areas. If it was exclusively to neighborhood development areas, I think I could be slightly more confident in saying the designation of an area as a neighborhood development area clearly indicates that housing should be here. Downtowns and growth centers have a broader set of components, including commercial business. But this is sort of I think the intent of this section was to acknowledge, yes, these areas have been designated. If the town finds that this residential development is within the character, that should not be challenged.
Yeah, so my understanding was, so the basic idea is that if it's designated, then the question of the character of the downtown has already been adequately addressed. Okay, I'd like us to maybe take a look at that, make sure. Maybe not right now, but as we consider this bill.
I'm trying to chase back down the conditional use approval under 441473. And is that up here in the bill?
No.
Okay, so what's a conditional, what happens in 441473 that relates to a conditional use?
So 4414.3 sets out the parameters of conditional use review. It's just the general statute where it's established.
Okay.
So conditional use is one form of review that a town can use. It's sort of, I think of it as the middle of the road level of review because it's not a full review for a land use permit, but it's also a greater level of review than is used in site plan review. And so under 4414, one of the elements of conditional use review is the use of this criteria for character of the area. So I can read you what it says, but it is just establishing that a town may establish conditional use review in certain districts, and it conditional use review then goes through the following elements, one of which is character of the area.
Thank you. So unless there was more, I know we're gonna come back to this more, but so I'm gonna flag my copy. Let's keep going on the tour. Yes, thank you.
I would also just add that I believe it was last year, unless it was the year before, in the prior housing bill that came from economic development that made its way here, there was already a limitation placed on the use of condition of character of the area. So already under the statute, multi-unit dwellings of four units or less cannot be denied solely on character of the area. And so this is another related type of provision related to character of the area.
Thank you. Section 10, Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Bray. I'm just wondering, when you testified over in economic development, if the term character, I'm sure that was a robust discussion of like the term character and how it can be used. Specifically how Sandra Ron Hinsdale talked to us about the color of law book and how at times that can be, at least what I've heard, used as a way to possibly disenfranchise people. I don't see that necessarily occurring in the way that the law has been actually implemented in our state, but I'm wondering if you would recommend any portions of testimony that you were a part of an economic development that may have covered this topic?
No.
Okay. Did it come up at all, like some of the racialized ways that, like, character in particular has been used?
Not that I can recall. Character of the area is a concept that has been litigated to time again. So, I don't know if they had any witnesses specific to this. Honestly, I don't recall. There were so many witnesses. And I was trying to keep up with testimony and I could not. Okay, I'll follow up.
So let's see if we can do 10 before we adjourn. Maybe yes, maybe no.
So section 10 is a pretty big concept that's being added to this bill. It's sort of colloquially known as by right zoning, which is something Vermont does not currently have, but that other states do have. So it's section 10 on page 15 is adding language to 24 VSA 4464B, which relates to municipal panel decisions on zoning decisions. So new language is adding is a decision rendered by the appropriate municipal panel for a housing development or the housing portion of a mixed-use development shall not require a larger lot size than the minimum as determined in the municipal bylaws, require more parking spaces than the minimum as determined in the municipal bylaws, and 4414, limit the building size to less than that allowed in the municipal bylaws, including reducing the building footprint or height. On to page 16, limit the density of dwelling units to below that allowed in the municipal bylaws, and otherwise disallow a development to abide by the minimum or maximum applicable municipal standards. So this is directing that the municipality, when it's reviewing an application, a zoning land use application, cannot reduce or limit that project. It can't diverge from the standards that the municipality itself has set in its bylaws. There is an out here though, so on line 7 on page 16. However, a decision may require adjustments to the applicable municipal standards listed in the above if the panel or officer issues a written finding stating why the modification is necessary to comply with prerequisite state or federal permit, municipal permit, or a non-discretionary standard in a bylaw or ordinance, including requirements related to wetlands, setbacks, or flood hazard areas and river corridors, and how the identified restrictions do not result in an unequal treatment of housing or an unreasonable exclusion of housing development otherwise allowed by the bylaws. So we're talking exclusively about decisions related to housing, so permits for housing. And sort of by way of example, in section 1 of this bill, the statute sets that towns cannot require more than 1 parking space per dwelling unit, or 1.5 if they have a parking constraint. The municipality in its decision on a housing development under subdivision little I on page 15 cannot require more parking spaces than the minimum unless they make a justification based on that language in subsection B. So it is requiring the municipality to follow its bylaws when it's making its zoning decisions unless it has a reason, and that reason is not discriminating against housing.
And then in lines 10 through 13 on page 16.
Right, there are various elements here beyond parking, but yeah.
So they're just highlighting wetland setbacks and flood hazards and flood hazard areas and river corridors. So they would already be allowed under law impact decision on permitting for housing. And they're just acknowledging that explicitly here.
So how this would play out is like, for example, there's a application for housing and the building size, for example, under the municipal bylaws, allows it to be 4,000 square feet. But in the municipal decision, the municipal panel directs that the building cannot actually be that large. It has to be 3,000 feet. And they may be able to do that if they can cite, well, there's actually a wetland on the site. And so the footprint of the building needs to be smaller because of that reason. So it is acknowledging that there may be site-specific concerns related to natural resources or something else that would physically constrain an individual site.
We're just after. Thank you for folks for being patient. Any committee questions, etc. Sarah McDonald.
Just the zoning regulation said it can't be smaller than X. And the zoning regulations also said the size X assumes that there's no wetland that would compromise the that size. This would override that?
Yes. Yes, if the zoning does not take into account that there may be something like a wetland.
The zoning does take it into account, that there may be something like a wetland. Then what?
Well, the municipality has to abide by what the bylaw says, and so the decision on that application can't vary from it.
Okay, so they could subsequently amend their zoning, existing zoning, to say, well, no, there are wetlands that meet the following definition. And that land cannot, that area cannot be counted towards the housing size that's permitted.
Yes, hopefully they've done that work, because some of that is required already for their municipal plan.
So having done that, if this, what is it that this bill overrides?
So the earlier sections of this bill are requiring towns to increase their density. A town needs to abide by their bylaws that they've adopted and the statutory density requirements. And so this provision does prohibit a town from varying from the decision they've already made. And that does sometimes happen during a permit review process. There is sometimes sort of a negotiation, which may result in the permit for the actual site having less than what the town bylaws actually allow.
Because of something like a wetland or
No,
the dinosaurs still live on that site,
It could be that.
endangered species or something.
no, not really. So potentially, and hopefully that is going on already, but this is trying to require the municipality to, if they're going to vary from the bylaws, they have to have a justification that they can list. And one of them may be wetlands. Hopefully, as you sort of pointed out, they're already doing that, but so if they can't come up with a justification, they can't do it.
Right, so thank you. Down, do you want, how about if we're a little after, I just don't want to have people pinned down. If we could resume at this section tomorrow, and great. You want to chase this down with council.
I'm asking these questions for towns that take it. I live in a town that doesn't have some, but I'm not defending their position or whatever.
We'll be taking it up tomorrow. we're gonna take it up tomorrow. And some of us have made promises.
Well, I just, yeah, I-
So I would ask, I know everyone's got full schedules, but if possible, please see page 32, that there are sections that are due. We are, spring, we had to go back to S5, we're not quite as far as I hoped, prior to starting. Try to read from 14 on through to 32 prior to our resuming work trial. I think that will be helpful for all of us.